Welcome in. It is day 2 of the big tournament, and we are locked and loaded, ready to go across Nexstar Nation, quite literally coast to coast. Our stations across the country covering every venue during this NCAA tournament opening weekend, where the field of 64 shrinks down to a Sweet 16. We lost 16 teams yesterday. Today, the other half of the bracket tipping off. We're going to start today with the team many people are picking to win this year's tournament as we bounce all the way across the country. Why would you not start with the Duke Blue Devils and what they've accomplished this season? You look at what they've done. The resume is impeccable. 29-5 overall. Obviously, it is a superstar roster with Zion Williamson leading the way among those talented freshmen. And let's get right to the action in Columbia. Aaron Anderson joins us live from Columbia to talk about the Blue Devils as they start their tournament journey today. They take on North Dakota State. Aaron, it's one of the great freshman classes of all time, right? 4 freshmen start. But that also means none of them have played in the tournament before. So how prepared is this group?
Well, I don't know that there's a better prepared team for this stage. And keep in mind, before the season began, Duke took a barnstorming tour of Canada. They were followed by ESPN on a documentary called Earn Everything, and they opened the season with Kentucky, and they blew the Wildcats, then #1, off the floor. They played at Madison Square Garden. In February, when they hosted UNC, that was the highest-rated regular season weekday basketball telecast in history. So as far as stages go, I don't worry at all about this basketball team. And keep in mind, when Zion Williamson arrived in Durham, he had over 1 million people following him on Instagram. So a lot of these kids have been used to all the noise. They've been used to all the bright lights. We talked to him yesterday about what it's like. I mean, everybody dreams about playing in the NCAA tournament. Now that it's actually here, what is it like? It was really the first time for me to see these kids actually look like kids. On paper, yes, according to the transcript, they are freshmen. They don't talk like freshmen. They don't look like freshmen. They don't play like freshmen. And when it comes to Duke, I don't worry about this stage in the NCAA tournament being too big for this basketball team.
Now, Aaron, obviously when you talk about Duke, you talk about another 4-letter word, and that's Zion, Z-I-O-N. The impression he has made on the country so far this year has been amazing. But we all remember just a few weeks ago the infamous shoe blowout he went through against Carolina. He has since come back. How has he looked, his health, I should say, since he's returned to the floor?
Well, I don't think Zion's missed a beat. In the ACC tournament, he scored 81 points. He was a unanimous pick for the MVP of that tournament. He looks great. Yesterday, for the first time, we actually saw him practice where he took his jersey off, and he's got this little Nike undershirt. He looked like a linebacker or a defensive end in the NFL. This kid is ripped. No ill effects of that knee injury. And I got to tell you, I really expect big things out of Zion today. He grew up in Spartansburg, which is about 90 minutes away from here. So, in effect, this is a home game for him. And he said yesterday he always hoped, in lieu of the fact that he did sign on with Duke and knew he'd be playing his college basketball in North Carolina, he always wanted to play a big game here in his home state. This is the occasion, and I got to believe today Zion Williamson is going to put on a show. I can't wait to watch what's going to happen. In fact, CBS is so pumped up about it. For the first time in tournament history, they have dedicated a camera to one player. It's going to be the Zion Williams camera. They're going to follow his every move. You'll see everything at home. You'll see multiple angles of every slam dunk, every jump shot, every foul. It is Zion mania, and I expect big things out of #1 today.
You know what, Aaron, though, really, any Duke game is a Zion camera. I mean, he's everywhere in those games. It's incredible to watch. Hey, Aaron, thank you very much for joining us in Columbia. Look forward to seeing the Blue Devils start the tournament journey later on today. All right, let's head to the South Regional now. Games happening out in, I said, hey, coast to coast, right? We're going to San Jose, California, and a fascinating first-round game we've got here between Oregon and Wisconsin. The Ducks, out of the Pac-12, they went on a run to win the Pac-12 tournament championship. They have had some things happen to them this year. Let's go ahead and go out to San Jose to talk to A.J. McCord, our good friend. She's there to talk to us about this game. Oregon winning the Pac-12 tournament, getting the automatic bid. That gave the Pac-12 3 teams in the field. A lot of people thought they'd only get 1 or 2. How did Oregon make that run last week?
Well, that's what Oregon did. They went from making it 1 or 2 Pac-12 teams to forcing the committee's hand and making it 3 because this Pac-12 tournament champ has to get in. And the way Oregon did it 9 games ago, Dana Altman went big with his roster. And it wasn't on purpose. It was simply because he was tired of losing. So he put 4 6'9" guys on the floor to start the game along with 6'2" Peyton Pritchard. And that worked, not necessarily because of the size, but he said he picked those players based on their unselfishness, based on the way they wanted the team to win. And like you mentioned, this team's been through a lot. They lost Bull, one of their best players, very early in the season. They had Kenny Wooten break a jaw later in the season. So between the injuries and then just kind of the havoc that was wreaked on the lineup, it took a while for this team to figure out who they were. But once Dana Altman went big with that lineup, they've lost only 1 game since then, and it was the first game, and they're on an 8-game win streak, and that's how they punched their ticket.
Yeah, AJ, obviously Bull was the massive recruit Oregon got this year, and injuries took him out for the season. So you have to credit Dana Altman, right? I mean, what an incredible job he's done in his whole coaching career. Everywhere he's been a remarkable coach. But you might argue this is maybe one of his best jobs, considering what he had to deal with from an injury standpoint. How did he get this group rallied?
You know, I think this is a classic Dana Altman season. He's been to the Big Dance 6 of the last 7 years for a reason. He's been able to do a lot with no matter who was on the roster. And this year, he knew he was going to have some particularly young, particularly inexperienced players. And so it's not surprising that it took him a little bit to figure out that hero ball is not going to work in college basketball. It's not going to get you through the Pac-12 play. You have to play as a team. And once this team bought into that and into the system that Altman has proven is so successful, that's when this thing turned around.
All right, AJ, Wisconsin is an interesting team out of the Big Ten. The traditional slow-down, methodical style you'd expect from the Badgers. You'll see a little bit of that in this game. Their big man is Ethan Happ, really talented player. How does Oregon try to defend him?
You know, Oregon said yesterday that their goal is not to stop Ethan Happ because that is likely not going to happen. Altman said a lot of coaches who are better than him have tried and failed. So they're not going to try and stop him, but they're going to try and contain him. He's so good with getting the ball out of his hands, with reading when double teams are coming. So Oregon has to figure out a couple of different looks to throw him off, to make sure they can trap him in double teams, make his possessions difficult, and make it also difficult for him to be a playmaker, to be an assister to his teammates. So that's what Oregon said they're going to try and do to stop Happ from wreaking havoc on them this afternoon. AJ,
you're a trooper braving the wet elements out there in San Jose. Thanks very much for joining us here, and we'll be following that game closely later on today. We're going to stay in the South region, but we're world travelers here. We're going to skip to the other side of the country again, but in the same region. Purdue advancing yesterday out of the opening round. Fairly impressive performance, I would argue, against Old Dominion. They got it done again. Purdue having a very strong season, but they're wildly inconsistent here toward the end of this year. A very interesting run, but with one of the best players in college basketball. For that, let's go back to Hartford, Connecticut, and our buddy Charlie Clifford there, the home of the Whalers, Hartford. Charlie joins us there to talk about the Boilermakers' debut in the tournament last night. Carson Edwards, he's hurt, Charlie, back injury and all he did was go out and score 26 last night. You kind of wonder, can he physically keep this up?
Well, Jerod, first of all, I want you to know this is an extremely high-risk live shot. I'm on the top of a building in the middle of the pouring rain in a 20-mile-an-hour wind, standing on a wooden box. So if we can get through this, Carson Edwards can certainly get through a sore lower back.
Yep.
The important stuff is Edwards played 40 minutes last night, 26 points on 23 shots. Those 23 shots, most of them were good shots, which is a problem sometimes with Carson Edwards. But he led him past Old Dominion, and I think this back thing is a non-issue at this point.
All right, so we've got check on pouring rain in San Jose and pouring rain in Hartford, so we're 2 for 2 there. Obviously, the Boilers tomorrow, they get Villanova in the NCAA tournament, defending national champions, Charlie, and it's a relatively close trip for Villanova, so you'd expect a little bit more of like a road environment for Purdue tomorrow?
It's going to absolutely be a Villanova home game. Last night, the John Morant show was packed. The Villanova game was packed. And then Purdue comes in for the nightcap. That place was empty in the second half. And Villanova brought a huge crowd during their win over St. Mary's, So a ton of Villanova fans are going to be here tomorrow night. And it stinks for Matt Painter. You get stuck with the late game, and oh yeah, in the second round you get stuck with a virtual road game against the defending national champions. Enjoy.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's a little different team from Villanova than we saw last year. Last year's team set the NCAA record for threes made in a season. They were remarkable en route to winning the national title. So it's a different team this year, Charlie, but it's not entirely new. There's still some holdovers from that team that'll be on the court tomorrow.
They do. Phil Booth, Eric Paschal, the two guys that make this team go. But I think if you're Purdue, you fall back on this. Look, if you put Villanova in the Big Ten, there's no way that team's a co-champ. There's no way they go through a Big Ten schedule and end up where Purdue is. So I think Purdue knows they're the better team. Now, will that matter tomorrow night in a road environment? It may not. Do they have a healthy No-Gel Eastern? The starting two-guard tweaked his ankle during pregame warm-ups yesterday. It looks like he'll be good to go. He was able to come back into the game against Old Dominion. So limit Phil Booth, limit Eric Paschal, and hope that Carson Edwards gets that jump shot back in time, and this Purdue team will be going to its third straight Sweet 16.
We'll be following that closely. Charlie, you and your photographer, Jason, you get a gold star for me today. You guys are just money.
For the record, this is Mike out of Hartford, so give him the shout out. He's been the MVP here all week. Straight to Perry Sook. Make sure Perry, I should say, knows Mike's doing a fantastic job.
And we'll note Jason is probably back at the hotel.
And Jason is as well.
Oh, okay.
Jason is as well.
Gotcha. Okay.
Jason worked till 2:30 in the morning last night, so he gets a pass this morning.
I was trying to cut him short, man. Thanks, Charlie. Appreciate you joining us in Hartford today. Good luck staying dry out there, buddy. We're going to stay in the South region for one of the more surprising teams in the nation, and it is the second seed in the South. University of Tennessee Volunteers, what a year they put together. 29-5 out of the SEC, number 2 seed, rewarding them for that performance. They're going to get Colgate in the opening round here, and that is later on this afternoon in Columbus. We're going to check in on America's 14th largest city, Columbus, Ohio. Mark Whiteman is joining us now on the scene down at beautiful Nationwide Arena to tell us all about Tennessee's season for Coach Rick Barnes. Look, uncharacteristic, lopsided loss to Auburn in the SEC title game. Do the Vols look at that game as more of maybe an anomaly than a concern?
Well, Jerod, first I got to tell you, not as high risk of a live shot this time around. I'm only a few feet off the ground, so no comparisons to previous reporters. But you mentioned the concern with Tennessee. I think anytime you lose a game, right, if you're not concerned about it, you're not learning from it. The problems in that SEC championship game for the Vols, they were twofold: taking care of the ball and defending the perimeter. And sometimes those things can bleed into each other. Tennessee turned the ball over 17 times against Auburn in that SEC championship game last Sunday, leading to a bunch of fast break points for the Tigers. That's one off their season high in terms of turnovers and 6 or 7 more than what they've averaged all year. So this is a team that's typically valued possessions and taking care of the ball. Auburn shot the lights out in that game, 15 for 40 from beyond the arc. That's what they do as well as just about anybody in the nation. That's something that Tennessee, very aware they've got to keep their eyes on, particularly against Colgate. Defending the perimeter, taking care of the ball, valuing every possession. Those are the things the Vols are looking to do as they get ready to take on the Raiders.
Yeah, Mark, it's a pretty balanced lineup for Tennessee. They got 5 players in double figures this season, but Grant Williams at 19 a game is really a star for them. They can also, if you've watched them play, they can effectively play a small lineup. It's like a blue-collar, physically and mentally tough team, I'd imagine.
Yeah, they are. They want to play inside out. They kind of started to really value the possessions when they put Lamonte Turner in the lineup at shooting guard. They've moved Jordan Bowden to the bench over the course of this year. He's really relished in that off-the-bench type of role. And you mentioned the way that they kind of are. They're an old-school, physical, back-to-the-basket type of team. Grant Williams, Admiral Schofield inside. They want to play from the inside to the out. But they are also mentally tough. You go back to the SEC semifinal against Kentucky. They were down 8 points in the final couple minutes of that game. A year ago, they would have lost that game. They rallied back, they played, they trusted themselves. Lamonte Turner was 0 for his last 11 from beyond the arc. He hit the 3 that was a dagger to beat Kentucky. So they trust each other, they play within themselves, and most importantly, they share the ball. And you mentioned the team. It's one of those cliche coach speak sort of deals. The strength of this team is the team. For whatever it's worth, every team in the lead up to the NCAA tournament has a press conference. Tennessee was the only team yesterday here in Columbus that sent all 5 starters to the main stage. That shows you how much they value each other and value that entire starting unit.
Very interesting. And they've beaten Kentucky, by the way, a couple times here late in the season, so that's a quality couple of wins there. Colgate, the first-round opponent today, the Patriot League champs. Any chance they make a game of this, Mark?
So what, 15 seeds, 8 and 131 all time against number 2 seeds in the NCAA tournament, so they're certainly going to be up against it. What the Raiders are going to want to do is change the math, right? I don't think you're going to see them give up a layup at the rim for a 3 like you saw at New Mexico State yesterday. But what they do better than just about every team in the country is shoot the 3 ball. I mentioned earlier that's kind of been a bugaboo for the Vols, especially in guarding against Auburn. Colgate shoots the ball quite well from beyond the arc. They're 11th in the nation in terms of 3-point efficiency. If they want to hang with Tennessee today, they're going to have to make a bunch of 3s from beyond the arc and stay tight with Tennessee because, as Matt Langel essentially said it yesterday, they don't have the physicality to match up with Tennessee and try to beat them at their own game. So he did say they went back and watched Loyola Chicago film to see how a mid-major team would stay competitive with the Vols.
Interesting strategy. All right, Mark, thanks for joining us live from Columbus, Ohio. Appreciate it. You're watching the big tournament. Just a reset here. We're going all across the country today. Games are being played at 4 sites across the country. We're going even beyond that as we get you set for day 2 of the NCAA basketball tournament. Pretty good tournament so far. A little bit of chalk. Just a couple upsets in terms of seedings so far in the brackets. Minnesota out of the Big Ten. Their big win over Louisville yesterday was very important for the league. But really, for the most part, other than maybe Florida over Nevada, a 10 over a 7, it's been fairly chalk-like. We'll see if that continues today, the status quo. Time to actually, we're going to stay in Columbus, Ohio for a little bit because another of the big powerhouse programs in college basketball is also in Columbus, and that is North Carolina. No school has been to more Final Fours than North Carolina. They've been to 20 of them. Another remarkable season for Roy Williams and company. 27-6 this year. A little bit of a balanced scoring effort from the Tar Heels, and let's go back to talk about it. Jeff Jordan is joining us from back in Columbus again to talk, or Jeff Jones, I should say, not Jeff Jordan. Michael Jordan, I think, played at Carolina. Jeff Jones is there to talk about Carolina. Jeff, they're not a dominant team, dominant scorer, but as a team, this is the 3rd highest scoring team in the nation. How do they do it?
You know, before I answer your question, I want to point out the fact that you just confused me with Michael Jordan.
Yes,
and that's
good.
The biggest compliment I've had in a while.
Awesome.
So thank you for that. So to answer your question, they're the 3rd highest scoring team in the country, but they don't have a dominant scorer, and that's really where the magic is. You know, Kobe White, their freshman point guard, could go off for 30 any night he wants to, but he doesn't have to every night because they have the senior Cam Johnson who could go off for 6 threes in a game if he wants to. Luke May, who has been here, done it before. He's won a national championship as recently as 2 seasons ago. He can score. So really what makes them so dominant on the offensive end is that they don't have to rely on any one scorer. They have 3 or 4 guys who could lead them on any given night.
Yeah, Jeff, they're a pretty talented team. The other thing that's amazing about it, you mentioned Luke May. Luke May has been in college since 1985, it seems. That kind of player you need on a championship team. How critical is Luke to UNC's chances to make a run here?
Extremely critical. And you know what's interesting is the best part of Luke May isn't what we see on the court, because if I'm being honest, at times this season he's been inconsistent on the court, but off the court he is the team's leader. In the locker room yesterday I had a chance to chat with Luke, and he told me about resiliency and how that's what won them a national championship in 2017, having those tough moments in settings like this. You know, the first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament, if you think back to 2 years ago, they struggled against Arkansas. I was at that game, and at times I thought the Tar Heels were going to lose. Luke says he wants to see more resiliency from this team, and that's when he'll know if they're championship caliber or not. So the leadership that he brings off the court and in the locker room is really what separates Luke and makes him such a big asset to this team. And as you said, Jerod, that's something he's learned over the course of his 32 years in college.
Yes.
He's been at North Carolina since '85, as you pointed out.
Yeah, he's drawing Social Security. Good for him, man. What a career. Iona, just 17-15 this year. That's the opponent for North Carolina today, the champions of the Metro Athletic Conference. But, Jeff, they've won 10 in a row. Think they'll bring a little momentum into the house today, maybe give the Tar Heels a run?
No, no, they don't have a chance in this one, and I hate to say that. I hate to count them out before the game tips off, but Carolina's on a mission, and I felt like Carolina's season turned in the middle of January when they lost at home against Louisville. They were blown out as the biggest home loss in the Roy Williams era. That's when their season turned, and they started going on that upward trajectory, and the best thing that could have happened to this Tar Heels team is the way their season ended last week against Duke in the ACC semifinals. That motivated them like no other. So I don't think many teams in this tournament have a shot to beat Carolina, and Iona is definitely not one of those teams on my list that could beat Carolina.
That is affirmative, sir. Jeff Jones, who is not Jeff Jordan, joining us live from Columbus. Jeff, enjoy the games today. Enjoy Columbus, buddy.
Will do.
All right, sounds good. Let's go to the Midwest Regional now. We're going to go to Jacksonville, back to the eastern coast. We went from the West Coast back to the East Coast. We're going to catch up with another of the blue blood programs in college basketball. In the Midwest region, you've got Kentucky, 27-6 overall. Again, another incredible recruiting class for John Calipari and his crew. And look at them now, a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament with a chance to make a really good run. If you look at the region, if you look at the Midwest bracket, it's them and Carolina as the top 2 seeds. Both of those teams have to be feeling pretty good about their chances. And for more on Kentucky, let's go to Jessica Wimsett. She covers the Wildcats. She joins us live now from Jacksonville. UK routing Abilene Christian last night in opening round. I thought they were going to stop the game at one point. They were so dominant, Jessica. They'll get Wofford tomorrow in the second round. Let's start with this. P.J. Washington. He's the Cats' leading scorer, but he did not play last night. Sat out the game with a foot injury. Could they maybe get him back for tomorrow, or is this a longer-term injury for him?
Well, unfortunately, guys, we don't have a ton of information about P.J. Washington, but the information that we do have so far isn't looking too good for Kentucky. Now, after the game last night, John Calipari told us what we do know, which is that tests have continued to confirm that P.J. Washington's injury is just a sprain, not a fracture. That's the good news. The bad news is that when Calipari was given the option of that precautionary walking boot that P.J. was in earlier this week, or a hard cast that he was told would promote and quicken the healing process, Cal said, let's put him in the boot. So that is where we are at right now. I got a couple looks at it last night. It is a hard cast. Okay. So that is what he is in right now. As for when that thing is coming off, that is also sort of up in the air. Cal said after the game last night that there are basically 2 options. Either the cast will come off later today, they'll take a look at his foot, reevaluate, and go from there. But the more likely option is that it will remain on, unfortunately, throughout the weekend, and then they will take it off either on Tuesday or Wednesday, reevaluate then, and, go from there. So, of course, that would mean that P.J. Washington would once again be missing the game tomorrow night. That is not what he or the Cats wanted to hear coming into this game against a very tough Wofford team. And, we keep being repeatedly told that this is a fluent situation, and so we will, of course, just have to keep getting updates. We'll hear from Cal later on today. Hopefully he'll have some more information for us. But the only thing we know right now is that it is a tentative situation. PJ, as of this morning, still has that hard cast on his foot, so not looking too good. Yeah,
we'll be following that very closely, as you'd imagine. So obviously with PJ not there, that means somebody else has to do the scoring for Kentucky. Last night, that was Keldon Johnson, hitting nearly double his average last night, 25 points in the win for the Cats. He's a potential NBA lottery pick. Does he have something to prove in this tournament? And maybe with PJ's absence, I guess there's a little bit more pressure there, too.
Yeah, well, I talked to Keldon Johnson after the game last night about what exactly was working for him last night, and he told me that basically he had the mentality that every single person on this team has right now, and that, again, goes back to the absence of P.J. Washington. They know with their sophomore star missing that every single person on this roster has to step up, and that's what Keldon Johnson did last night. You mentioned Wofford, and this team is certainly not taking the Terriers lightly at all. They know they are a very dangerous team, and that every single person, including Johnson and the other guards, will have to step up tomorrow night if they want to get that win. But they all told me last night, they got their first tournament game jitters out of the way yesterday. They're hoping that they can head into tomorrow night's game with the same mentality that probably every team in the tournament has right now, and that is just simply win and advance.
All right, Jessica. So on that note of Wofford, If you watched him last night, it was extraordinary. You actually saw history. 7 threes last night made by Fletcher McGee. That gave him 509 for his career. That is the most in NCAA history. Wofford is shooting the three now, Jessica. Is that a concern for Kentucky going into tomorrow?
Well, I think it's certainly a concern for Kentucky fans. I was out here yesterday, and especially with that absence of P.J. Washington, they were a bit worried if Wofford won that game last night, which of course they did. And I mean, I think the only positive that you can take from that is that Kentucky's defense has looked very good through this final stretch of the season. You know, aside from that lapse at the end of the SEC game against Tennessee, the third game actually. Right. So I think that they will be able to handle it okay. But I mean, like we just said, you know, guys like Keldon Johnson, Ashton Hagans, Hero, those guys are going to have to step up to make up for the absence of P.J. Washington. And if they don't, then we're going to have an upset here in Jacksonville tomorrow night.
That'll be something to follow. Jessica Wimsatt joining us live from Jacksonville to talk about the Wildcats. Thanks for helping us, Jessica. Appreciate that. We're going to work on Tulsa time now. Go out to the West region. One of the more entertaining teams in the country. Maybe you've not seen them play this year, but you're probably missing out because Buffalo is a show. 31-3 overall this season with a tremendous history in the NCAA tournament, a team that's accustomed to being in the NCAA tournament. That's why they're a 6th seed this year, and they get Arizona State in the opening round, which is an interesting matchup in a number of ways. We'll get to that in a moment. First of all, let's go live to Tulsa right now. Josh Reed joins us there. He covers the Bulls. He joins us to explain this rise in the Buffalo program. They won a tournament game last year, beat Arizona. 4 tournaments in the last 5 years, and then dominant, obviously, all this year. What is the key element to Buffalo's run here, Josh?
Well, I would say it's twofold. One, they're a mid-major, and they've made that work to their advantage. They don't have to worry about the one-and-dones that you get at Duke and at North Carolina. Now, with that being said, don't get me wrong. Head coach Nate Oates wouldn't mind a couple of All-Americans at some point on his roster, but they really have a group of 5 seniors who have played a ton of basketball. It's led by C.J. Massenberg. The kid can just flat-out play. He was the MAC Player of the Year. Secondfold, I want to talk about blue-collar mentality. It is their motto, and quite frankly, when you think of Buffalo, you think of blue-collar mentality, and that's what they have. That is what they hang their hat on quite literally. After every game in the locker room, head coach Nate Oates hands out a hard hat to the kid who played the gutsiest, the grittiest, picked up charges, did the little things, went after loose balls by diving on the floor. Now, don't mistake blue-collar mentality with just kind of winning ugly. This team, I think they have blue-collar swag. When they walk into an arena, they think they're better than the other team. And let's face it, they won 31 games, and that tells me it's not just ugly. They're winning pretty.
And it's not just swag. You're right. It's skill. This is one of the highest-scoring teams in the country, nearly 85 points a game. You mentioned Massenberg. I was watching some tape on him yesterday, and if you haven't seen him play, he's a 6'3" guard who maybe has some NBA potential. I think people are looking at him at the next level. Explain his game. If you've never seen Massenberg play, how special is he?
CJ is never going to be the quickest guy on the court. He's never going to be the tallest guy, the biggest guy. But he is always going to be the guy on the court that somehow finds a way to get to the ball. He's always in the right spot at the right time, averaged just over 18 points per game, just over 6 rebounds per game, 3 assists. He is the man, MAC Player of the Year, and quite frankly, it wasn't even close. Here's the thing with CJ. When you talk about those guys that just have the it factor, he's got that it factor. He has no conscience. If the game is on the line, he wants the ball, and he will shoot it from anywhere. He dropped 43 points on the road at West Virginia earlier this season, was just unconscious. They had no answer for him. He's going to give Arizona State some big troubles in this one. Here's the other kind of cool thing about him. They've played 34 games this season. He has scored in double figures in all but one of those games.
Wow, that is stunning. Actually, I watched that West Virginia game. He was phenomenal on that night. Look, there's moments, Josh, where you realize the NCAA Tournament Committee has a little bit of a sense of humor, and this is one of those moments. The fact that Buffalo is going to play Arizona State. Bobby Hurley, head coach of the Sun Devils, former head coach at Buffalo. Nate Oates was his assistant there. Now he is the head coach at Buffalo. I don't know if you talked to Hurley yesterday. What does he think about meeting his old program under this spotlight of the NCAA tournament?
Well, the NCAA has a sense of humor, but I can tell you this, Bobby and Nate, they don't think it's funny at all because these two became really good friends going back to 2013 when Bobby hired Nate as his assistant coach. Bobby said, look, when we're out on recruiting trips, we make it a point to meet up and have dinner together, to sit and chat. They talk to each other consistently throughout the season. Bobby said during his press conference yesterday, he said, you know, the part that really stinks about this is we root for each other all season long, and now we know that on Friday, one of us is going to send the other one home, and that's never a good feeling to do to one of your friends. Yeah. Now, they said, look, they talked as soon as the announcement came out on Sunday about the potential of this happening, and they haven't really talked since. They said, look, we'll kind of go our separate ways, and then we'll talk following the game. But I can tell you this, neither of these coaches wanted this matchup, but they are both very, very competitive. So you better believe there may be something on the line. There may be a dinner on the line for this one.
I was just going to say that exact thing. There might be something at stake. Josh, awesome job in Tulsa. Thanks for joining us, buddy.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
All right, and there'll be one other game to note in Tulsa later on today. The late tip-off tonight is a phenomenal game. We talked about it a little bit yesterday. Ohio State, the 11th seed, with one of the best big men in the country, Caleb Wesson. He will be on the court to take on Iowa State coming off their Big 12 championship run. Mario Shyok, if you haven't seen him, a player who transferred from the University of Virginia to go to Iowa State. He has led them on a phenomenal run this season. That'll be an interesting matchup, and that is a late tip-off tonight out in Tulsa. One final stop to get to. We're going to go to Des Moines, Iowa. We're going to stay in that west region where we just were a moment ago to talk about Michigan. The Wolverines, what they did last night against Montana. They put on a little bit of a clinic, starting off the tournament in good shape, knocking off Montana. We'll go to Joe Alessio, who joins us live now from Des Moines to talk about the Wolverines. They're such a deep, balanced team, right? Teskey inside, Simpson running the show, Bristikis, the freshman, great score. But it was actually Charles Matthews fueling Michigan last night. That depth just has to scare people, right?
It absolutely does, and I'm going to get to Michigan in just a minute. But I just want to tell you, Michigan State head coach Tom Izzo. It's a beautiful day out here in Des Moines. He's out for a morning walk, so he's taking in the weather. So it's kind of funny as we're getting ready to talk about Michigan. Here comes Tom Izzo
say hi
out
for us, man.
Like,
yell at him. Hey.
But as you, yeah, well, when he comes back, we're going to try and grab him, right? I'll try and talk as long as I can here. But it's funny when you talk about Charles Matthews, because as you look at that roster, he's the only senior, and one of the storylines when we came down here, you were wondering, who is going to be the guy? Mo Wagner was the guy last year for Michigan, and a lot of fans remember him across the country because he kind of connected with a fan base because he does take that blue-collar approach. He was a hard worker, always fighting for that loose ball. But what he did for Michigan was he was a consistent scorer for that team that made that run to the national title game. And so we were wondering who is going to be the guy, because when Michigan has struggled at times this year, it was because they had some lapses in that scoring. They do have a lot of depth, and sometimes that promotes, well, who's going to take the shot? Who's going to step up and do this? And Charles Matthews coming off that ankle injury and being a senior, I think a lot of people were wondering, is this going to be the guy that can do it? And yesterday, or I should say Wednesday, when we were here talking to him, he was focused. He's a pretty intense guy, and he's pretty locked in when it comes to this stuff. But man, it felt like in that locker room last night, there was a big relief and a release from not only Matthews, but the other guys around him because he scored 22, but it wasn't just that he scored 22. When Montana cut it to 8 in the second half, here comes Matthews hitting a 3, and then he had a layup, and all of a sudden, boom, we're back out to a 14-point lead. So Charles Matthews leading the way is important, and that promotes the balance that this team needs, because the depth is there, but you got to have a guy who steps up and takes control, and Charles Matthews did that.
That's a very good point. And you mentioned Mo Wagner, one of those great players on last year's team. A lot of those guys are back this year, but you wonder about the value of that experience last year, playing in 6 games in the tournament, nearly winning the championship. Do you sense there is a value from that run last year that this team can use to its advantage?
You know, it's funny because when we're in locker rooms and doing interviews, a lot of times the answer is, well, last year's in the past, and you know that we're not worried about that. We're a new team. A lot of the guys, when we talked to them this week, they said, no, last year's important because we were young and we hadn't been through this. We didn't know what it was like. And every game was a learning experience, and they're happy to have that experience, and I think it fuels them, and they want to experience that again. It's like when you're a kid and you just happen upon a game and you're having a good time, and you're like, how can we recreate that fun? Well, in that locker room last night, that fun was there, that feeling that was there last year, that excitement, that youthfulness about this program, it was there, so that bodes well for this team, you know, moving forward. All that being said, they got a pretty good opponent in front of them.
They certainly do. We're going to talk about Florida now. Pulled off a slight upset last night, holding off Nevada. You look at the whole SEC, right? We've been talking about it in this show with Kentucky and Tennessee. They had such a great year overall. Florida was a part of that run. What does Michigan expect from the Gators tomorrow?
Well, Michigan expects a much tougher test. I mean, you know, with all due respect to Montana, athletically speaking, they just did not match up well with Michigan. So as Michigan struggled offensively, they were able to kind of weather the storm through that because there just wasn't the athleticism that they will face with Florida. Florida's athletic, so if you let them hang around, it's going to be a problem. They play really good defense, so Michigan's, you know, three-point shooting, which was not very good yesterday, that's going to have to improve to kind of hold Florida at bay. Florida's issue, though, you know, and I haven't seen them play, but just in trying to get some background and watch them against Nevada, is they have lapses in offensive success. So that plays into Michigan's hand because one thing Michigan does do well, they play hard on the defensive end of the floor. At one point in that against Montana, it was, I think, only 6 points for the Grizzlies with 8 minutes to go in the first half. And that was due to Michigan's defense. It wasn't so much that Montana was struggling offensively. So we'll see how that plays out. If Michigan shoots well from the outside, I think this is going to be a win for Michigan. But we'll see. I mean, it's the tournament. It's the madness of it. This is why we have fun and watch these guys play.
Joe, really appreciate you joining us there live this morning from Des Moines. And is Coach Izzo, is he walking the other direction now? Where is he headed? I want the latest on Coach.
I don't see him. I don't see him, but next time we do this, then
that's
maybe
right.
I'll get him.
What
That's all I got.
Timing.
I got nothing.
Joe, really appreciate you joining us this morning. Thanks very much there from Des Moines. One quick trip around the big board back here for the big tournament so you can see a little closer breakdown on all the regions. We'll start here in the South. Again, for the most part, all the games are today. Again, Villanova and Purdue playing yesterday, so it's a fresh buffet of basketball that'll be happening, including the #1 seed, Virginia. We talked about them yesterday. Remember, the only #1 seed to ever lose a 1-versus-16 game. They've got Gardner-Webb today. Gardner-Webb playing in its first ever NCAA tournament game. Can you imagine their excitement? In the Midwest bracket, we talked about Carolina and Tennessee. Their games, obviously, Carolina is in the Midwest bracket here with Kentucky, the 1 and the 2 seed. Pretty much chalk so far with some interesting games today. I think that Utah State-Washington game, the 8-9 game, will be very interesting to follow. Washington was the pride of the Pac-12 for the bulk of the season here. In the East Regional, Duke, again, the #1 seed. 4 games to go today. Curious to see who comes out of that VCU-UCF game. UCF has an enormous size advantage on pretty much everybody they play. We'll see how that fares with VCU and their tournament experience. And then obviously Virginia Tech-St. Louis is a really interesting game. St. Louis just won their conference championship. Really strong team there. Tech has had a great year out of the ACC. And then in the West region, we just talked about it a moment ago, Florida and Michigan will be that matchup that'll come up tomorrow. Games today, we mentioned Buffalo, we mentioned Arizona State. That'll be a great game. Texas Tech, what a year they put together out of the Big 12 in a run to the top of the conference standings there. Look out for Northern Kentucky. They put together a great season with Coach John Brannon there. We'll see if they can do something special in their debut in the NCAA tournament. So that is a look around the big board for the big tournament. Day 2. We're here all weekend. We work weekends around here, going coast to coast across Nexstar Nation to get you covered for the big tournament. So join us back here at noon tomorrow and noon Sunday, and we'll get you set for days 3 and 4 of the NCAA tournament. For now, thanks for joining us.